Well, hello, my friends. I'm glad you're back for another story time. Yeah, where I tell my favorite stories from my 50 years here on this planet Earth. The story I'm going to tell you today is the first time I met my future in-laws, my wife, Kathy, who was then Kathy Doverspike, her parents, the first time that we met. They, Bill and Nell Doverspike were, I guess they were in their probably early 60s at this time. Her dad had recently had a heart attack and was in pretty good health at the time, but they had decided they wanted to come and visit their daughter in Nairobi, Kenya. And that's where Kathy and I had met and fell in love, and they were going to come out to meet this guy that their daughter kept talking about, who was me. So they came on over, and we picked them up at the Nairobi International Airport, Jamhuri Airport, and they had a nice break for about an hour or so, and then we were headed out to the bush because we had a pretty tight schedule of things that we were going to go see. And our first trip was going to be to go and visit Amboseli. Now you've heard a couple of stories if you've listened to some of the other story Tims about getting stuck in danger with the lions coming at me, and the night visitor, which I won't tell you what that was just in case you haven't seen it, but some of those were from other visits of mine to Amboseli, which is at the base of Kilimanjaro and at the border of Tanzania and Kenya, one of my favorite game parks. I mean, way out in the bush. Well, anyway, I piled up the Dover Spikes and Kathy and her mom and dad, Bill and Nell, into our Peugeot 504, and we headed off down south from Nairobi. Well, you get out of Nairobi about a couple of hours, and then you start getting on dirt roads. And we came to this dirt road where you were supposed to go on down to the Amboseli, and it came to a fork in the road. And you know, the signage was actually on the ground, so we didn't know. It looked completely the same whether we were supposed to go left or go right to Amboseli. You couldn't really tell any other difference. I mean, it was not like an obvious thing like Amboseli Game Park this way, you know. So we were like, well, which way we're going to go? And I said, well, I think it's probably to the right. So we headed off down to the right. And you know, the thing about when you're in Africa is Africans, when when you ask Africans for directions, Africans always want to make you happy. So they'll never tell you, I don't know, Bwana, we are not sure, we don't know. They will say, well, you know, you go down to the right and you take a right and you go that side. Now, they may have no idea at all, but they want you to leave happy, because after you've got some directions, you're like, oh, thank God, you know, I know where I'm going now. So you would never follow any directions unless you got 2 or 3 Africans basically saying the same thing. And then you can kind of figure, well, I got a good percentage chances that this is probably right to go right. Well, unfortunately, you know, when you're way out there in the bush, I mean, there's no way even African to ask you which way we're going. So we went right, we started going, and we just kept going, we kept going. Now, one of the things about being in Africa, too, is that, you know, the signage is not always good or not there at all. And so you have to come to trust the basic landmarks and stuff. You look for different landforms, like you can say, well, the mountain's this way and it should be this way. It should be to my right. I need to stay to my right, you know. It's like dead reckoning or something. Well, unfortunately, you know, if your dead reckoning is off, you can end up dead, you know. So we kept going right and kept going down the road, and I was looking at Kilimanjaro, and it kept going further and further to my left, and I'm like, I know what Kili looks like when I'm in Amboseli, and it should be like slightly to our right, and we're basically at the foot of this thing. So I thought, well, it's got to be in this direction. So we kept going towards it, and it kept getting further and further away from the direction that where it should be. And of course, here I am with my future in-laws in the car. One of them has already had 1 heart attack, and I'm like, oh, that's just great. You know, we're going to get out here in the bush. The other thing about being in Africa is you don't normally travel at night because, for one, you can't see the road as well. For another, you know, like in Texas, where, I've done a lot of traveling and stuff too, you might have a white-tailed deer that would get out in the road, but in Africa you can have a giraffe get out in the road, and so you don't really want to run over a giraffe or an elephant. That becomes somewhat problematic when you run into a big game animal like that. So it was starting to get dark. I was getting more and more uptight about this, about what am I going to do with these Wazungu, these white people that are tourists out here in the middle of the bush in the dark with a heart condition. So, we passed up and I finally saw somebody. It was a Maasai warrior. You can imagine what the Maasai look like. They're kind of wearing a red kind of like a loincloth kind of thing, kind of draped around them. They have their big spear that they carry around with them, and they have an unusual way of doing their hair. Tim, I got less and less hair all the time, but if I was a Maasai, it would look even worse, because what they do is they braid their hair, and then the way they use to fix it into place is they mix the soil in Kenya is a kind of a red clay, and they mix that up with cow dung to give it a really nice consistency, to make it look very, very beautiful. So they mix all that stuff up together, and they work it into their hair, and then they braid all that hair, so it's kind of these kind of rows of stuff like that. Well, you can imagine, I guess if you got the dung on your head, and as your hairstyle and stuff, I guess that's close enough to your nose where I guess after a while you get kind of used to the smell. It doesn't bother you anymore. But when the Maasai guy jumped in the car with us, now that was a whole different level of odor involvement, where we're like, oh man, Hello Kitty, So, the first thing you do when a Maasai gets in your car like that is you roll down all the windows, so that, you don't have quite as much right up in your face cow dung smell. And the other thing is just, they carry their own. Now, these guys are out in the bush. I mean, there's plenty of Maasai guys in Nairobi now that are businessmen in three-piece suits, but this is out of the bush. And these guys carrying for their cattle and stuff like that. But they get in and they have their own herd of flies that get in with you. So there's just flies everywhere in the car and a smell like this. But, the Maasai guy definitely knew where he was going. So he took us kind of back country through these different trails and game trails, and got us back in the game park to finally get us over there to where we were going to go to the game lodge, so that we weren't stuck out there in the middle of the bush with the two tourists and myself in the dark in the Peugeot. So I say thank you to wherever that Maasai warrior is right now. He saved our butt that night, and we made it safely to the game lodge, and that was another story, Tim.